My spouse told his friends I was dead weight while I worked 3 jobs. I left him with the bills and a for sale sign. The laughter coming from the living room sounded like broken glass. I stood in the dark hallway, holding a bag of greasy burgers I bought after my 3rd shift of the day. My back ached, and my feet were swollen inside my cheap work shoes. Through the cracked door, I saw my husband, Jason, leaning back in the leather chair I had paid for. He was holding a glass of expensive scotch and smirking at his high-roller friends. "Yeah, Abigail is basically dead weight at this point," he sneered, his voice dripping with ice. "I'm just waiting for my promotion to drop her for good. She's dragging down my aesthetic. Look at her, she always smells like floor cleaner and desperation." His friends roared with laughter, toasted to his future freedom. I looked down at my calloused, soapy hands, then at the $200 shoes I bought him with my hard-earned overtime pay. My heart didn't break, it turned into a cold, hard stone. I didn't push the door open. I didn't scream or throw the cold burgers at his lying face. Instead, I turned around silently and walked back to my old, dented car. My breath hitched in the quiet of the driveway, but I refused to cry. I pulled up my banking app on my phone, the screen glowing like a weapon in the dark. Jason truly believed we were living large on his salary. He had no idea that for the last 3 years, I had been the one secretly covering the mortgage, the rising utility bills, and even his flashy car note. I did it because he always claimed he was overspending on his image for work. He was a hollow man living a life he couldn't afford, and I was the engine keeping him moving. I realized right then that if I stopped paying for just 48 hours, his entire fake world would go completely dark. I finally walked inside, rubbing my eyes to look like the exhausted woman he expected. Jason didn't even look up from the video game he was playing on the giant TV I bought last Christmas. "Dinner is cold, Abigail." "Honestly, get it together," he snapped, waving a hand dismissively at me. He didn't notice I hadn't brought the food in. He leaned back and demanded that I pay for a boys' trip to Vegas next weekend. "Consider it your rent," he joked, looking at his phone. His friends, who were still lingering, chuckled at my expense. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, but I kept my face as smooth as a mask. I looked at him and forced a small, tired smile. "Sure, Jason," I said softly, my voice steady. "I'll make sure everything is taken care of. Every single thing." If you want to see how I make him pay, hit subscribe for more revenge stories. To Jason, I was just a ghost that moved through the house, but my reality was a battlefield. My day started at 4 a.m., scrubbing cold office floors until my knees bled. From there, I went to a 9-to-5 desk job where I hid my exhaustion behind a computer screen. When the sun went down, I didn't go home. I sat in the library, working on late-night freelance coding projects that brought in the real money. Jason never asked why I was gone so much. He preferred to believe I was at the gym or visiting my boring mother. He liked me out of the way so he could play the part of the successful bachelor in our neighborhood. I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over his head, while he spent his days flirting with coworkers and buying silk ties he didn't need. I was the foundation, and he was just the peeling paint. The betrayal took a sharper turn on a rainy Tuesday. While Jason was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I usually never looked, but the name Chloe popped up with a heart emoji. I reached into his blazer pocket, looking for my car keys, but my fingers hit a small, velvet box instead. I opened it to find a diamond bracelet that sparkled under the bedroom lights. It was beautiful, expensive, and definitely not for me. I felt a sick twist in my gut. Later that day, I called his office to congratulate him on the promotion he had been bragging about. The receptionist paused, her voice turning awkward. "Abigail, Jason wasn't promoted," she whispered. "He was actually put on a performance improvement plan 2 months ago. He's barely holding on to his job. He had been fired yesterday, hiding the truth by spending my hard-earned savings on another woman." I spent the next morning in a small, quiet office meeting with my cousin, Sarah, who was a top real estate agent. I sat across from her, my hands wrapped around a warm mug to stop them from shaking. "I want to list the house, Sarah," I said, my voice sounding firmer than I felt. Sarah looked at me with confusion, her pen hovering over her notepad. "But Abigail, isn't the house in both your names?" "Jason would have to sign the papers too," she cautioned. I reached into my bag and pulled out the original deed, sliding it across the desk toward her. I had bought this house with my inheritance long before I ever met Jason. It was 100% mine, and I had never added his name to the title, no matter how much he begged. "List it," I told her, a cold spark finally lighting up in my eyes. But don't put the for sale sign up until next Friday. Our 5th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Jason was acting like he was the king of the world. I found his private messages on his tablet while he was out networking. He told his friends he was taking me to a cheap shack for the weekend because he was bored of supporting his deadweight wife. But that wasn't the real plan. In reality, he was planning to use that 4-day window to move his mistress into our guest house while he told me I was away on a spa retreat. I checked the doorbell camera footage on my phone and saw them together. They were standing on my porch, laughing as they scouted out the rooms through the windows. He was showing her my home as if it were a gift he had bought for her. My blood boiled, but I remained silent. He thought he was playing me, but I was the one holding the remote. I decided to do some digging on the girl, Chloe. She was only 22, a self-proclaimed influencer who spent her days taking selfies in expensive hotel lobbies she wasn't staying in. She clearly believed Jason was a millionaire CEO who was about to rescue her from her tiny apartment. She was already tagging our house as home sweet home on her private Instagram account, showing off the garden I had spent years planting. I followed her from a distance one afternoon and realized the truth. Chloe was just as broke as Jason was. She was wearing knockoff designer bags and driving a car with a past due sticker on the window. They were two vultures trying to eat a meal that didn't exist. They were perfect for each other, and they were both about to lose everything. Subscribe now to see how I pull the rug out from under them. I began my quiet withdrawal that very night. Every time Jason left the house to meet his business partners, I moved. At 2 a.m., I would carry boxes of my most precious belongings to a small storage unit I had rented across town. I was careful to be silent, moving like a shadow in the home I had built. I didn't want him to notice the gaps, so I replaced my expensive, heirloom kitchenware with cheap, dollar store lookalikes. I took the real paintings down and put up blurry prints. Jason was so self-absorbed and busy dreaming of his life with Chloe that he didn't even notice the house was changing. One evening, he looked around the living room and frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Why does the house feel so echoey in here lately?" he asked. I looked him in the eye and shrugged. "It's probably just your ego expanding, Jason." The final move of the week was the most satisfying. I went to the bank and opened a solo account in my name only. I sat with the manager and filed the paperwork to divert all 3 of my paychecks into that new account starting immediately. I then went into our joint account, the one Jason used to buy his scotch and silk ties, and moved almost every penny out. I left exactly $1 in a balance. I wanted him to see that single digit and feel the weight of his own failure. Jason had no idea that his ATM had just closed for business. He was currently at a luxury car dealership, trying to lease a brand new Porsche to impress his friends for their upcoming trip. He thought he was moving up in the world, but he was actually standing on a trapdoor, and my hand was already on the lever. The humiliation started at the high-end dealership downtown. Jason was standing there, surrounded by his high-roller friends, leaning against a sleek, silver Porsche. He was bragging about how his dead-weight wife finally came through with the funds. When the salesperson swiped our joint card to finalize the lease, the machine let out a long, loud beep. "Declined," the man said, his voice echoing in the showroom. Jason's face turned a deep shade of purple as he tried again, then a third time. His friends started whispering, their smirks turning into judgmental stares. He stepped outside and called me, screaming into the phone. "Why didn't you transfer the money, you useless woman? You're making me look like a fool." I leaned back in my chair at work, listening to him gasp for air. I calmly told him that the system must be down, and hung up. He told his friends I simply forgot to move his wealth. I decided to let the darkness literally settle in. I forgot to pay the electric bill for the first time in 15 years. That Friday, Jason was hosting one of his ego-boosting poker nights. The house was full of cigar smoke and the sound of clinking chips. Suddenly, right as Jason was about to bluff a big hand, every light in the house flickered and died. The AC hummed to a stop, and the silence was heavy. His friends had to use their phone flashlights just to find the door. "What is wrong with you, Abigail?" Jason bellowed once they were gone, his voice shaking with rage in the pitch-black kitchen. He blamed my incompetence for ruining his reputation. He pointed toward the door and told me to get out and not come back until the lights were back on. I smiled in the dark, grabbed my keys, and did exactly what he asked. I didn't go to a cheap motel. I checked into a 5-star spa resort for the entire weekend, using the money I had diverted from our account. I spent my morning getting a deep tissue massage and my afternoon lounging by a heated pool. I sent Jason a single photo of a work conference flyer I had found online to keep him off my trail. Meanwhile, he was sitting in our dark, sweltering house, sweating through his expensive shirts because he didn't even know how to call the utility company. Chloe was sending him frantic texts, complaining that if the AC wasn't fixed immediately, she wasn't coming over to celebrate his fake promotion. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the heat was just starting to rise. If you're enjoying his downfall, hit subscribe for the grand finale. While I was enjoying a glass of chilled white wine by the pool, my phone rang. It wasn't Jason. It was a debt collector. My heart stopped for a second as the man on the other end explained that a personal loan for $50,000 was 3 months past due. I never took out a loan, I said, my voice turning cold. He emailed me the documents, and there it was. My signature, forged in a messy scrawl that looked just like Jason's handwriting. He had used my credit score and my name to fund his aesthetic life while I was scrubbing floors. This was the firm payback I needed to end him forever. In our state, forgery isn't just a mistake. It is a felony. I didn't cry this time. I felt a surge of energy because I knew this signature would be his one-way ticket to a jail cell. I knew I needed more than just a forged document to destroy a man like Jason. I hired a private investigator named Mike to follow him and Chloe. I didn't just want a divorce, I wanted to strip him of every lie he ever told. 2 days later, Mike sent me a video file. I watched it on my laptop, my jaw tight. The camera caught Jason and Chloe at a fancy bistro, laughing over oysters. Jason leaned in and whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch it. Once I divorce the dead weight, the house and the settlement will be ours. We'll be set for life, baby. He was literally counting money that didn't exist, planning to sell my inheritance to fund a life with a girl half his age. He thought he was the hunter, but he was actually the prey. I sat Jason down on Wednesday and told him I had a surprise. I've booked us a 4-day cruise to reconnect, I said, watching his eyes light up. He wasn't thrilled about spending time with me, but I could see his mind working. He saw a 4-day window where the house would be completely empty, the perfect time to move Chloe and all her belongings in without me ever knowing. He hugged me, a fake, hollow gesture that made my skin crawl. That sounds amazing, Abigail. You really do care. He lied through his teeth. I told him I would meet him at the pier on Friday afternoon because I had to finish one last big shift at work to cover the costs. He practically pushed me out the door the next morning, eager to start his double life. He thought he was winning, but he was just clearing the way for my final move. The moment Jason's car pulled out of the driveway headed for the pier, I swung into action. A professional moving team I had hired weeks ago pulled up in 3 massive trucks. We stripped that house in 4 hours flat. We took the furniture, the curtains, the rugs, and even the light bulbs from the fixtures. I made sure every memory of my life there was packed safely away. By noon, the house was nothing but an empty shell of wood and glass. It looked as cold and hollow as our marriage had become. Just as the last truck pulled away, my cousin Sarah pulled up in her real estate van. She hopped out with a mallet and pounded a bright red for sale sign into the front lawn. The trap was set, and the bait was a cruise that didn't even exist. Jason was standing at the pier with his luxury luggage, wearing a captain's hat and looking for a ship that wasn't there. He called my phone 20 times, but I let every single call go to voicemail. I sat in a cafe nearby, watching his GPS dot on my laptop screen. He was stranded at the docks, 2 hours away from the house, getting more frantic by the second. Just as he realized there was no cruise scheduled for that day, he got a loud notification from the bank. I had called the finance company and informed them that the owner of the Porsche was no longer employed. A text flashed on his screen. Your vehicle has been scheduled for repossession due to failed verification. He was stuck at a pier with no wife, no boat, and a car that was about to be towed away. While Jason was losing his mind at the docks, I was already settling into a beautiful luxury apartment I had rented across town. It was bright, modern, and best of all, Jason didn't know the address. I poured myself a glass of expensive wine and opened the app for my doorbell camera back at the old house. I sat back on my new velvet sofa and waited for the show to begin. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in decades. The dead weight was finally off my shoulders, and the gravity of the situation was about to pull Jason down to the bottom of the ocean. I watched the screen as a car pulled into the driveway of the empty house. My heart hammered against my ribs as Jason stepped out and stopped dead in his tracks. Jason's jaw hit the pavement when he saw the for sale sign. He ran to the front door, fumbling with his keys, but I had already had the locks changed. He began screaming at the neighbors, who were all standing on their porches filming the successful CEO having a total breakdown. Just then, Chloe pulled up in a U-Haul truck overflowing with her cheap furniture and bags. She hopped out, expecting to be carried over the threshold of her new mansion, only to find Jason crying on the porch of a house he didn't own. They started screaming at each other right there on the lawn, their perfect love evaporating in seconds. Chloe realized the millionaire was a fraud, and Jason realized the dead weight had just cut the rope. Subscribe now to see the police arrive and end his night in handcuffs. The scene on the front lawn was better than any movie. Jason was red-faced, pointing at the empty windows, while Chloe shrieked about the gas money she spent to get there. "Where's the furniture, Jason? Where is the life you promised me?" she yelled, tossing a bag of her clothes onto the driveway. Jason tried to grab her arm, but she shoved him back against the for sale sign. I decided it was time to share the wealth, so I accidentally went live on Facebook. Within minutes, the whole neighborhood, his former coworkers, and his high-roller friends were watching the millionaire CEO have a pathetic tantrum on a porch. He was sobbing, begging her to stay, while the world watched his fake life crumble into the dirt. He wasn't a king anymore, he was just a man standing in an empty yard with nothing but a U-Haul full of lies. I had left exactly one thing inside that empty house. Right in the middle of the kitchen floor, I placed a neatly organized stack of every single bill I had paid over the last 5 years. It was a mountain of paper, mortgage payments, car notes, grocery receipts, and even his dry cleaning tabs. The total at the bottom was a staggering $250,000. On top of the pile, I left a sticky note in bright red ink. "Since I'm dead weight, I figured you'd enjoy carrying these yourself. Welcome to the real world, Jason." As he peeked through the window and saw the mountain of debt, the police cruisers I had called pulled into the driveway. I had reported trespassers at my property, and they arrived with their lights flashing, reflecting off the tears streaming down his face. The officers stepped out, their hands on their belts. Jason tried to act like he was the man of the house, puffing out his chest despite the sweat and tears. "This is my home. My wife is just playing a prank," he shouted at the sergeant. I pulled up to the curb in my new car, looking calm and professional. I stepped out and handed the officer the deed and the official vacate notice I had mailed to Jason weeks ago, the one he had tossed in the trash without opening because he was too busy texting Chloe. "He was informed to leave 21 days ago," I said firmly. The officer looked at the paperwork, then at the empty house, and back at Jason. "Sir, you don't live here anymore," the officer stated. Jason was trespassed from his own castle in front of the entire block. But the best part was still to come. As the officers started to lead him away, I reached into my bag and pulled out the documentation for the $50,000 loan. "Officer, there is one more thing," I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning. "I'd like to press charges for identity theft and forgery." He forged my signature to fund his lifestyle. I handed over the bank's fraud report and the private investigator's recording of Jason bragging about his plan to defraud me. Jason's face went from pale to ghostly white. He tried to run toward his car, but the officers were faster. They spun him around and clicked the handcuffs into place. He was taken away in the back of a cruiser, his face pressed against the glass, while his high-roller friends watched from the sidewalk, laughing at the fallen fraud. The grand revenge arc was finally in full motion. The very next morning, the house sold for a massive cash offer. Because I had kept the house in top shape while Jason played games, I walked away with a profit that felt like a fortune. I didn't spend it on flashy clothes or a new aesthetic. I used every penny to start the tech consulting business Jason always told me I was too stupid to run. I hired the best team, rented a sleek office, and poured my 3-job work ethic into my own dreams for once. I wasn't scrubbing floors for a liar anymore, I was building an empire. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the engine in someone else's car, I was the pilot of my own ship, and the wind was finally at my back. Subscribe to see Jason's life in the motel. Jason's fall didn't stop at the curb of our old house. After spending a night in a cold cell, he was released on bail, but he had nowhere to go. With his car repossessed and his bank account sitting at a lonely dollar, he ended up in a flea-ridden motel on the edge of town. The walls were thin, and the carpet smelled like stale cigarettes and regret. Chloe, the influencer who promised him forever, had blocked his number before the police cruiser even left the neighborhood. She had already moved on to her next mark, searching for another man with a fancy title and a hollow wallet. Jason sat on the edge of a stained mattress, staring at a flickering TV, realizing he didn't even know how to pay a basic phone bill. He was finally alone, and the silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. I decided to clear my name once and for all with the people who mattered. I invited Jason's high-roller friend group to a quiet coffee shop. They showed up looking uncomfortable, probably expecting me to beg for information. Instead, I opened my laptop and showed them the actual bank statements. I showed them the dead weight ledger, the proof that Jason had been borrowing money from my cleaning shifts to buy their expensive rounds of drinks and steak dinners. Their jaws dropped as they realized the millionaire CEO was actually a parasite living off an older woman's hard work. One by one, they deleted his number. They realized that Jason was the true dead weight all along, and they didn't want to be dragged down by his sinking ship. The social circle he valued more than his marriage had officially closed its doors to him. Jason tried one last desperate move. He hired a cheap, billboard lawyer to sue me for half the value of the house. He claimed that because we were married, he was entitled to the profit from the sale. I met him in a small mediation room, looking him directly in his bloodshot eyes. My lawyer didn't even need 10 minutes. We presented the original inheritance papers, the premarital deed, and a mountain of evidence regarding his financial abuse and the forgery charge. The judge didn't just dismiss his claim, she looked at Jason with pure disgust. She ordered Jason to pay me back every cent of the forged $50,000 loan, plus legal fees. He walked out of that room with less than nothing. He was buried under a mountain of legal debt that he couldn't possibly climb over. While Jason was struggling to find his next meal, my tech consulting firm officially launched. I called it the Engine, a nod to the life I had left behind. It was an instant success because I knew how to work harder than anyone in the room. I wasn't just a manager, I was a builder. Within months, I was featured in a local business magazine as a late-bloom success story. The cover photo showed me standing tall in a sharp suit, my calloused hands finally smooth and manicured. The irony was the best part of the story. During my expansion, I found out that Jason's old company was struggling. I didn't just watch from the sidelines, I reached out and hired Jason's old boss, the man who had put him on a performance plan, to be my new vice president. The power dynamic had completely shifted. One rainy afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. It was Chloe. She was broke, her influencer career had stalled, and she claimed Jason was stalking her, begging for money he thought she had hidden away. She offered to testify against him in the forgery trial, providing screenshots of him planning to drain the old lady dry if I would just give her a small consulting fee to get back on her feet. I sat in my high-back leather chair and took a sip of expensive coffee. I didn't hate her anymore, I just felt a cold pity for her. I typed back a short, simple reply. I don't need your help, Chloe. I have all the evidence I need. But don't worry, I'll make sure you get a front row seat to watch the show. A few weeks later, I saw an ad for a local police auction. In the center of the lot sat Jason's silver Porsche, the one he had bragged about at the dealership before his world fell apart. I didn't even need a car, but I showed up anyway, wearing a sharp designer coat and sunglasses. When the bidding started, I raised my hand once and didn't lower it until the hammer fell. I bought the car for a fraction of its value, paying in full with a single check. I didn't buy it for the speed or the aesthetic Jason loved so much. I bought it because it was a trophy of my victory. I wanted to own the very thing he had lied, cheated, and forged documents to obtain. Now, the car that represented his fake success belonged to the woman he called dead weight. I drove it off the lot feeling like a queen. One morning, while I was driving my new trophy car to the office, I spotted a familiar figure standing near a bus stop. It was Jason. He looked disheveled, wearing a faded shirt that was missing a button. His hair was greasy, and he was clutching a cheap plastic folder. I pulled the silver Porsche up to the curb right in front of him and lowered the window. The look on his face was a mixture of horror and pure longing. He recognized the car instantly. I didn't say a word, I just adjusted my sunglasses and checked my watch. He looked like he wanted to scream or beg, but the bus pulled up, splashing a puddle of dirty water onto his shoes. I pressed the gas and left him standing in a cloud of exhaust, a literal ghost from a life I had outgrown. Later that evening, my phone pinged with a notification from a mutual friend. Jason had sent out a long, pathetic video to everyone we used to know. He was sitting in his cramped motel room, crying into the camera, claiming he was a changed man who had made a few unfortunate mistakes. He begged for his wife to come back and help him rebuild his life, promising to be the partner I deserved. He looked small, broken, and completely transparent. I didn't feel a flicker of sadness or nostalgia. I simply copied the link to a popular how-to-find-a-job website and sent it as a public reply to his post. I wanted everyone to see that his emotional plea was just another attempt to find a free ride. I was done being his safety net. It was time for him to learn to walk. The consequences of his actions finally reached his family. Jason was eventually evicted from the flea-ridden motel because he couldn't even manage the weekly rent. In a final act of desperation, he called his mother, sobbing and asking to move back into her basement. However, I had already taken the liberty of sending her a package. It contained the police reports, the bank statements, and the private investigators' recordings. When he called her, she didn't offer him a room or a warm meal. "You reap what you sow, Jason," she told him before hanging up. Even his own mother couldn't ignore the evidence of how he had treated me. He was truly homeless now, with no one left to lie to and no one left to blame for his own miserable choices. The castle was gone, and so was the kingdom. The forgery case finally went to trial on a cold, gray Monday. Jason sat at the defense table, looking pale and nervous in a suit that was 2 sizes too big for him. When it was his turn to speak, he tried to claim that I had given him permission to sign my name and that it was all a big misunderstanding between a loving couple. He looked at the jury with puppy dog eyes, trying to play the victim one last time. My lawyer stood up and played the recording of him bragging to Chloe, "She's too dumb to notice a few thousand missing." The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at him with such intensity that Jason actually withered in his seat. There was no more room for lies. The truth was playing back in his own voice, and the jury had heard enough. The jury didn't even need an hour to reach their decision. Jason was found guilty on all counts of forgery and identity theft. Because it was his first major offense, the judge showed a tiny bit of mercy, but not the kind Jason wanted. He was sentenced to 3 years of intensive probation, 500 hours of community service, and massive monthly restitution payments. To stay out of prison, he was legally required to maintain steady employment. For a man who thought he was too good for manual labor, the sentence was a nightmare. He was forced to take 3 different low-wage jobs, flipping burgers, cleaning stadium seats, and delivering packages, just to pay back the dead weight he had stolen from me. The irony was perfect. He was now living the exact life of exhaustion he had mocked me for, but without the reward of a home to return to. Months passed, and my life reached a level of peace I never thought possible. I decided to take a long overdue break and flew to Bali. I spent my mornings working remotely from a beautiful villa overlooking the ocean and my afternoons walking along the white sand beaches. My business was thriving back home, managed by the team I had built with trust and respect. I looked at a notification on my phone one evening while watching the sunset. Jason had started a GoFundMe page, claiming he was a victim of a bitter ex-wife and needed help with his legal fees and basic survival. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page. The total amount raised after 3 weeks was exactly $0. Not a single person from his old life was willing to spare a dime for a ghost. I sat on my balcony in Bali and looked at my hands. The calluses from years of scrubbing floors and typing through the night were gone, replaced by soft, healthy skin. I realized then that my 3 jobs hadn't just been a way to survive Jason's greed, they had been my training ground. They taught me resilience, financial management, and the grit required to build a real empire. I wasn't a victim of those years, I was a graduate. I pulled out a piece of stationery and wrote Jason one final letter. I didn't fill it with anger or insults. I just wrote the facts. "You called me dead weight because you were drowning, and I was the only thing keeping you afloat," I wrote. "Now that I've let go, you finally have to learn how to swim or sink on your own." When I returned home, I was invited to give the keynote speech at a major women's empowerment conference. The grand ballroom was packed with hundreds of people eager to hear about building an empire from the ground up. I stood on the stage under the bright lights, feeling powerful and whole. Halfway through my speech, I glanced toward the back of the room near the exit doors. There, wearing a bright orange reflective vest and pushing a heavy trash cart, was Jason. He was part of the contract cleaning crew for the convention center. Our eyes met for a split second. He looked exhausted, older, and completely defeated. He had to stand there and watch the woman he belittled receive a standing ovation from a room full of leaders. He was literally cleaning up the floor I walked on. As I finished my speech, I looked out at the crowd and smiled. He thought I was the dead weight dragging him down, I told the audience, my voice echoing with total clarity. He didn't realize I was the engine. When the engine leaves, the car stops moving. I walked off that stage knowing I had achieved the ultimate justice. "Thank you,"